Breaking news from the international defense world, dated January 06, 2026. The headline that just exploded across every defense analysis desk this week: U.S. used kamikaze drones for the first time in Venezuela, despite extensive missile arsenal. Now, if you are dedicated to supporting a stronger Europe and defending a sovereign Ukraine, this deep dive is required listening. We're cutting through all the noise to give you the strategic context that you really need. I'm Alex. Join me with Aria in this latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover the fallout from Operation Absolute Resolve. This was the most direct and frankly shocking U.S. military intervention in the Western Hemisphere since 1989. This wasn't just a strike. This was an operation that captured a sitting head of state, threatened to rewrite the basic principles of international law, and debuted a deadly new generation of American weaponry.
Okay, let's unpack this for you. We've spent the last 72 hours deep in the sources, multiple intelligence leaks, legal analysis reports, you name it, covering Operation Absolute Resolve. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut to understanding the entire picture. And we see three absolutely crucial layers here. First, you have the unprecedented military operation itself, particularly the new hardware that made it happen. Second, there's the complex and deeply conflicting legal justifications being put forward versus what is, frankly, an overwhelming global legal consensus against it. And third, and this is where it gets really critical for our audience, the immediate and I think surprising ripple effects of this action on other conflicts, especially the war in Ukraine.
Right, so you need to understand not just that Nicolás Maduro was captured on January 3rd, but why this operation, why the methods and the rationale matter for the future of warfare, and critically for authoritarian regimes around the world who are watching this whole thing unfold right now.
And we have to start with the gear. We have to start with the tech, because it really explains the speed and the success of this raid.
Absolutely. Yeah. The tactical success here created a shockwave, not just because of the target, but because of the specific hardware they used. We've been tracking the naval blockade for months, but the actual execution of Absolute Resolve, it featured a major debut. At first, the reports just mentioned localized explosions. But the new evidence clearly confirms that U.S. forces rolled out one-way attack drones for the first time in a large-scale combat operation.
And this is a massive doctrinal shift. I mean, it's one that directly mirrors lessons learned from watching Russia's use of expendable drones in Ukraine. For years, the U.S. military has relied so heavily on these expensive, highly capable and persistent reusable drones, like the MQ-9 Reaper.
Right, the Reaper can cost, upwards of $30 million a unit?
Yeah. And
its whole mission is persistence.
Yeah.
Loitering, surveillance, strike.
Yeah, but the platform we saw in Venezuela was something completely different. It's the U.S.-developed LUCS, which stands for the Low-Cost Unmanned Combat Attack System. It's a loitering attack drone.
So it's designed to be expendable.
Treatable. Swarmable, even. Precisely. I mean, you look at the comparison, the LUCAS is estimated to cost maybe $50,000, $100,000 per unit. This signals that the U.S. military is finally embracing lower-cost, expendable strike packages. It's designed for a terminal dive. It launches, loiters, finds its target, and then it's gone.
And the acoustic signature is the dead giveaway of this shift, right? Witnesses in Caracas described a Shaheed-like sound, that low buzz from a small engine.
Mm-hmm. It's a sound that has become synonymous with relentless low-cost strikes in Kyiv, in Odessa, in Kharkiv.
A sound of asymmetrical warfare.
And the LUCAS systems were integral to the operational success, too. You see, the explosions weren't random. They systematically targeted critical antennas and key military bases, specifically Fort Tuna and the La Carlota Air Base.
So why focus the new tech specifically on those two locations? What was so important there?
Because that's where Venezuela's advanced air defenses were concentrated. They've invested heavily in Russian anti-access capabilities. We're talking S-300VM, Buk M2E, Pantsir S-1. I mean, these are serious modern Russian surface-to-air missile platforms.
So this wasn't about brute force. It was about surgically disabling their ability to fight back before the main force even arrived.
Exactly. It was about preemptive digital and electromagnetic suppression, likely using the swarm capability of the LUCAS to overload or just precisely destroy their radar and command nodes. The goal was total air superiority in minutes.
Which is astonishing. So, tactically, the execution was lauded across the board as a military classic. General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, praised the synchronization, Thousands of troops, 150 different aircraft bombers, fighters, surveillance planes, helicopters, all launched from over 20 bases, and all with total surprise.
And critically, with a minimum footprint once they were actually on the ground. The key military detail here is the timeline. The actual boots on the ground phase, the raid itself, was over in just 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
That kind of speed is absolutely essential for a high-risk decapitation strike like this.
And we saw Delta Force and the 160th SLR helicopters leading that raid. But the sources also note the FBI hostage rescue team was there, which seems like a strategic choice, right, to make the formal arrest.
It frames the narrative. And the outcome, of course, was the capture of Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. They were swiftly flown to New York City to face a standing indictment on narco-terrorism charges.
Okay, now this is where the fog of war meets the political agenda, and you really have to read between the lines of the official narrative.
You do, because the U.S. administration justified this entire action as a law enforcement operation against a wanted fugitive. A narco-terrorist.
Yeah.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio was adamant. He claimed it was merely an arrest of 2 indicted fugitives, and the military was just there for support.
But wait, if the U.S. justification rests solely on that narco-terrorism arrest, doesn't that feel a little thin? Can we really draw a clean parallel to the 1989 invasion of Panama to capture Noriega?
It's the comparison everyone is making. But the sources we're seeing point to a massive difference in stated intent. While the legal framing of drug charges does resemble the Noriega incident, the actual strategic narrative is far, far more expansive.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, the U.S. wasn't just talking about law enforcement. President Trump explicitly invoked the Monroe Doctrine. He called it the Donroe Doctrine. And then he stated the U.S. would run the country until a transition. And he guaranteed U.S. companies total access to rebuild and control the world's largest proven oil reserves.
So, the immediate stated objective of capturing a fugitive was completely intertwined with this explicit goal of resource control and mandated regime change.
Absolutely. That's just the whole historical comparison. Analysts are arguing that while Noriega might be the legal precedent, the actual strategic goal here, regime change, driven by resource control, aligns much more closely with the 2003 invasion of Iraq.
And the political instability in the aftermath proves the regime change wasn't exactly a clean sweep.
Not at all. Maduro loyalists are still partially in power. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as acting president.
And Trump immediately threatened her, saying, if they don't behave, we will do a second strike.
Right. And that brings us to the second and I think most problematic layer of this whole deep dive, the global legal fallout.
This is where we shift from a tactical victory to the geopolitical cost. And the reaction wasn't just political opposition from the usual suspects like Iran and Russia. It was an immediate, broad legal consensus condemning the action.
A consensus from international legal experts, the UN Human Rights Office, other UN bodies. They were all explicit that the action undermined a fundamental principle of international law. Specifically, the operation is seen as a violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter.
Okay, so for our audience, what exactly does Article 2.4 prohibit? We hear it cited a lot, but what does it really mean in a case like this?
Well, Article 2.4 is basically the cornerstone of the entire post-World War II global order. It prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Forcibly entering Caracas with a military force and seizing the leader is, it's the textbook violation.
But what about the argument for self-defense? The administration argued narco-trafficking was a threat to U.S. security. Didn't they try to invoke Article 51?
They did, but the core legal argument against the U.S. is that criminal indictments for narcotics trafficking, even for a head of state, just don't legally satisfy the very stringent requirement for unilateral self-defense under Article 51. Article 51 requires an imminent or ongoing armed attack. International law simply doesn't recognize drug flow as meeting that high threshold for a unilateral military intervention. It's why the condemnation was so broad and so fast.
And we should also note the domestic legal friction, too.
Yeah.
This was all executed without congressional approval.
Oh, absolutely. And that prompted serious bipartisan concern in Congress about executive overreach and a violation of the War Powers Resolution.
Yeah, we saw Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego, a Marine veteran, publicly call it the second unjustified war in my lifetime.
It's reignited a really deep-seated debate. Who gets to authorize military action, and what even constitutes a war when the stated objective is just a targeted arrest?
And globally, this perp walk diplomacy, seizing a sovereign leader and flying them to a foreign court, That sent shivers across the global south.
It created genuine fear. You had the African Union, influential states like South Africa, condemning the raid forcefully. Their fear is that this action normalizes a system where military might decide which rules apply, not international law. Critics fear it reinforces that the habits of hierarchy have not vanished.
A warning to smaller states everywhere.
A very overt warning. If the U.S. can cook up a counter-narcotics narrative for an operation in Venezuela, well, similar narratives could be constructed anywhere.
Which brings us directly to the most urgent implication of all, the geopolitical tilt this creates, and the direct threat it poses to deterrence in Europe and specifically for Ukraine.
Right. This action, unfortunately, it gives powerful states a brand new playbook and a massive opportunity for legal deflection. So it raises the question, how does this new successful precedent immediately impact the war in Ukraine and the position of President Zelensky?
Well, the initial response from Moscow was just predictably hypocritical. Russia condemned the Venezuela raid as armed aggression, demanding Maduro's immediate release.
And that condemnation came just hours after a Russian missile attack leveled a residential apartment block in Kharkiv, killing a child.
The cynicism is just breathtaking.
It is. It shows Russia's intent to use this incident to deflect all international criticism and try to undermine the West's moral standing.
But the sources reveal a stunning internal Russian reaction that goes way beyond mere deflection. A former Putin speechwriter who's now a critic in exile noted that the U.S. attack looked like a more competent version of the military operation Russia launched against Ukraine in 2022, the one that failed.
And this is the absolute crux of the geopolitical danger. The quote, which has been flying around diplomatic circles, is just chilling. He said, "What Trump did to Maduro, actually Putin should have done to Zelensky." Quote, "Trump solved the problem within just half an hour. Putin is still going through painful and big expenses, and he is far from being successful."
That sentiment, that this kind of efficient, successful decapitation strike is actually achievable, that's what fundamentally destabilizes the situation for Europe.
Exactly. The fear is that the U.S. action, by violating sovereignty to seize a leader on a contested legal premise, it sets a dangerous precedent that revisionist states like Russia and China can now exploit.
So analysts are warning that Putin could now be encouraged to adopt a much more aggressive stance toward President Zelensky.
He could use the Venezuelan model, a lightning strike to achieve a political objective, and then cite the U.S. action as his legal cover.
The U.S. created an American exception to international law.
And exceptions are what great powers always demand when they want to justify their own aggressions. This is why you saw the UK Prime Minister and other European leaders choosing their words carefully.
Right, they couldn't condemn capturing a dictator outright, but they had to stress upholding international law and collective security, particularly in Europe at a difficult time.
They recognized the cost. The U.S. action, regardless of its tactical brilliance, it risks greenlighting snatch-and-grab operations in Estonia, in Taiwan, wherever Xi and Putin decide they want to go next.
So Operation Absolute Resolve has dangerously destabilized the very foundation Ukraine relies on for its sovereignty.
It really has.
So we've seen the successful debut of the LSC Ace Kamikaze drone. It's a huge tactical achievement, a permanent shift in U.S. military thinking. But we've also seen the massive geopolitical price tag, undermining the legal architecture that protects smaller nations and providing Russia with a dangerous new precedent.
And if you connect all this to the bigger picture, the core tension here is whether the post-World War II legal order, which was specifically designed to constrain great power violence, can even withstand this. Can it withstand great powers just systematically deviating from those constraints under the guise of law enforcement? The stability of Europe, the future of Ukraine's leadership, it all now hangs on the global response to this.
You now understand the technological innovation and the geopolitical risk. But here is something to mull over. If the U.S. legal system eventually throws out most of the charges against Maduro because of how he was captured, will any country ever feel safe arresting a foreign leader again? Or does the military precedent, the successful raid, does that simply outweigh any future legal ruling? Does a legal win even matter if the military doctrine has already been set?
A fascination test case for sure. The collision of military capability versus the judicial process.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
It's 8. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.